So my name is Jen Carlo, and I'm the program manager of Patient Choices Vermont. Been doing that for just about a year. Patient Choices Vermont is a nonprofit. We're funded by donations and grants. As you might imagine, we don't receive any kind of government funding, and we've existed since about 2002. Our founders were folks who successfully advocated for the passage of Act 39, which happened finally in 2013. Only 11 years of leadership and advocacy and education working toward that, and actually just found out today that the anniversary of Act 39 is May 20th. So we're coming up on year lucky 13. Patient Choices Vermont has worked to safeguard and improve Act 39 since then. And there have been various amendments made to the law over time. The biggest one, of course, was in 2023 when the law was amended to allow non-residents to access MAID in Vermont. All the steps of the process must still take place with Vermont licensed physicians and physically in Vermont, but we are one of only 2 states in the country to allow non-residents to access medical aid in dying through our legal process. We also provide this kind of education and outreach around Act 39 and medical aid in dying, and the organization has a very small paid staff. You've now met both of us. And then we're supported by many wonderful volunteers who give a lot of time and energy and care to support this. So medical aid in dying, what is it? I promise you that I read very, very few slides, but there's a very specific definition of medical aid in dying, and it has several elements that I want to make sure that we capture. Medical aid in dying allows qualified adults who are terminally ill and who are capable of making their own decisions the option to receive a prescription medication to be self-administered to bring about a peaceful death at the time of the patient's choosing. And it can only be accessed by qualified adults through a specific process. The qualifications for medical aid in dying in Vermont are very specific, and they're laid out in Act 39. You do have to be an adult, 18 or older, and you must have a terminal diagnosis and a prognosis of 6 months or less, which is similar to the qualifications for hospice. You must have the mental capacity to make healthcare decisions, including this one, and that must be true throughout the process and up to the moment of ingestion. You need to be making an informed and voluntary request, and your physician will ask you some questions to make sure that that's the case. And you must be able to self-administer the medication. And all of those qualifications must be met in all cases. There are no waivers or shortcuts or exceptions under the law. The process to access medical aid in dying in this state is also laid out in Act 39. You need to make 2 oral requests to your prescribing physician, and those need to be 15 days apart. That's a safeguard that's built into the law to make sure that you've had enough time to complete and consider the process. You also need to make a written request to your prescribing physician, and it's a form. You can find it in the clinician's guide on the Patient Choices Vermont website, as well as on the Vermont Department of Health website. The form needs to be witnessed by 2 people who will in no way benefit from your death. They cannot be members of your family. They cannot be members of your care team. They need to be unrelated to you. And you also have to have a second physician confirm that you qualify for medical aid in dying and that you have followed this process. After that's happened, your prescribing physician can write the prescription when you're ready to set an ingestion date. So on the day of ingestion, the patient will take 2 medications for nausea about a half an hour before you take the medical aid in dying medication. After confirming again that the patient wishes to ingest, they will drink the medication without assistance. The medication is a compound of 5 different elements. It's a powder that's mixed with about 2 ounces of a clear liquid. Generally, water and apple juice are recommended to make sure that the liquid has dissolved fully in the water. You need to drink it within a very short time. Generally, the patient will fall asleep within 5 to 10 minutes after ingesting the medication. and will not awaken again. Time to death can be variable. About 80% of folks who access MAID will die within about 2 hours, although there are some who can take a bit longer. Your prescribing physician should be aware of any red flags or conditions, anything that might cause a longer time until death. The patient is, as I said, unconscious and will remain so, will only go deeper into unconsciousness. So the patient won't be aware if it's taking longer than the 2 hours that it takes most folks. But your family and friends and your support system should be prepared. And we strongly recommend hospice enrollment for any number of reasons, the symptom management, the wraparound services, and also because if you are under hospice care, your death can be pronounced by a hospice nurse. And that can be very, very beneficial in terms of progressing legally. Medical aid in dying is always voluntary, and it's voluntary for everyone involved in the process. Qualified patients can choose to pursue medical aid in dying, and it's always the patient's choice. And it's important to know that you can stop or rescind the process at any time, really right up until the moment you ingest the medication. It's entirely the patient's choice. Healthcare providers are also not required to participate in medical aid in dying. So if your regular physician cannot help you with this, you can ask them for referrals, or you may need to find someone else to work with who would be willing to prescribe the medication for you. We have resources on our website to help you talk to your doctors, some sample questions, and some other things to help you frame that conversation. And again, hospice enrollment is so important that we put it on 2 slides. So strongly recommend hospice enrollment to folks.
Someone asked if the rules regarding the process and the day of ingestion apply to all states or if they vary by state. And they do vary, but the requirements that are consistent across states in the United States is that you have a terminal diagnosis and a 6-month prognosis. So that is true in every state in the US. But the other elements of the process do vary.
It's coming.
Someone also just asked if you need a hospice in Vermont. And the answer is it's not required, but as Jen said, it is highly recommended. Jen, do you want to say more about that?
No, I would just remind everyone that if you're coming from outside Vermont to access MAID, you can work with your hospice at home to transfer to the care of a Vermont hospice agency. But again, all of the steps of the process need to take place in Vermont with Vermont licensed physicians. Medical aid in dying is not suicide. There's a very distinct legal difference. If a patient accesses MAID, their death certificate will reflect their underlying condition as the cause of death. There are practical differences and there are emotional differences. You will often hear the phrase physician-assisted suicide. Amy and I were just talking about this earlier today. That's a phrase that's very much in the culture and it's incorrect. Medical aid in dying is not suicide. It's also not euthanasia. The requirement to self-administer the medication is absolute, and that's a requirement in every U.S. jurisdiction, so it's not euthanasia. And it's also not for everyone. It's important to note that Patient Choices Vermont doesn't advocate that any individual person try to access MAID or make any particular end-of-life choices. We want to provide information about the law and the process so that people can make their own informed decisions if they qualify. I would strongly recommend that you take a look at the Patient Choices Vermont website. It's very, very information dense. There's a lot of good things on there. There's the descriptions of the qualifications and the process for MAID that I just gave. There's links to the Vermont Department of Health forms. There's also some more personal stories. Some former patients and their families have been generous enough to share their stories with us so you can get a more personal look at their journey. There's a clinician's guide that has an awful lot of good information geared toward clinicians about the process of MAID and some of the medical aspects. And there's news, educational events. Please sign up for our mailing list because you're going to find out about next month's Exit Matters and all of our other programming. And there's always a lot of good information in our regular newsletters as well. A couple of groups that I also want to mention. The Wayfinders is an affiliated network. They're not official PCV volunteers, but they're an independent and collaborative group. And you're about to meet two of them. Two of our three speakers serve as Wayfinders as well. And Wayfinders can work with either Vermont residents or folks from out of state to help support their journey, to help find lodging, logistics, prescribers, ingestion sites, etc. Can also include emotional support and other services as you move through the medical aid and dying process. We also have a helpline. Most of the inquiries there come in through a web form that's on our website, and I'll post that in the chat later. We have 4 helpline volunteers who work a week at a time, and they provide individualized responses to probably more than 1,000 people per year. We get a lot of folks who write in asking about the process, asking about coming to Vermont to access MAID, asking about their individual situation. And these are 4 very dedicated volunteers who work hard to provide prompt responses, specific responses, and compassionate responses. So that's a good way to reach us if after this presentation you have more questions.
There's another question about how a doctor decides if someone is competent, and just pointing out that someone's mental competency can vary by week, month, day. At what point does mental decline become incompetent, for MAID purposes? So someone does need to be able to make an independent decision from the first request of a prescribing physician all the way through the process, including the day that they take the medication themselves. And so for people that have any kind of diagnosis and condition that may affect their mental capacity, it's something to be really upfront and talk with your doctor about and learn what they believe that trajectory might look like, because if MAID is something that you're considering, you're going to want to think about the timing of that.
Any other questions?
Yeah, at the moment, I'm actually thinking of my sister who has Parkinson's, has had Parkinson's. I haven't talked to her about this, but she's she's in hospice, but that 6-month rule seems a little fuzzy at times because I don't know, it just does. I don't actually expect her to die in 6 months, but I wouldn't be shocked. Yes, I know she has to be competent, but she's not as competent as she used to. But she's not incompetent to make all decisions. She lets
Mm-hmm.
me handle her finances. I don't think she has the executive functioning to do the finances. She decides when she wants to go to church, when she wants to buy. I mean, she has an allowance. She can spend it. How, for MAID purposes, is it the MOCA? Is it the doctor's sign, whatever the doctor has on the 602 form? How is the competence? And she could be competent when she sees the doctor, and then depending on what's defined, incompetent 4 hours later, depending on when she last had her medication. How does that all fit into it? Because brains don't just cross a line and one day you're competent and 1 hour you're not.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So the doctor is going to be having a conversation with her. And so there's not any kind of formal assessment like the MOCA that the physician needs to complete. It's really much in the way that they would talk with someone about any medical procedure that they're looking for informed consent for. So they need to know that the person understands what they're asking for, what the consequences of that choice will be, and they're going to be checking in with the patient on those key things at each visit, including the day of taking the medication. And they recognize that sometimes if someone, for example, is on high doses of pain medication, that may affect their thinking process. And so that's something that the prescribing physician is going to take into account as well and talk with them about.
You said on the day they take the medication as if it was almost known when it would be taken. Do you have to make an appointment and set a time? You can't just have the medicine available for when you decide I'm done.
You can. For people that are coming from out of state, in Vermont, most prescribers are going to wait to, and the day is often known in advance because that person is
Sure,
traveling to Vermont. For people that
sure.
live in Vermont, I think that there is a little more leeway and people can receive the prescription and have it in their home and it is their medication. But it is the prescribing physician's legal responsibility to make sure that all of the requirements are being met. And so again, it's going to be up to that prescriber. So if they've sent in the prescription and allowed the patient to fill it, and then they don't know, they're going to be checking in most likely with that patient. So an extensive period of time does not go by. That might really change things, not just
Ah,
the mental competency, but also the person's ability to swallow. The person, there's a lot of things that they need to make
yeah.
sure are still that the person's still able to do independently. If they have a neurodegenerative disease, that they're able to manage that. Or perhaps, as I think Lindsay wrote in the chat, maybe they want to look at a different mode of administration rather than drinking, maybe using a feeding tube or using a rectal catheter. So it is important that it sounds simple that there's these two visits with the doctor and a consulting visit, and then they write the prescription. That's kind of the bare bones requirements. But ideally, there's much more communication going on. And again, depending on, it's so particular to the person and their situation, right?
Greatly pleased to welcome back to Exit Matters three of our favorite presenters, Kasey March, Lindsey Warren, and Michelle Acciavatti. Lindsey and Kasey presented in October on What is a Death Doula to a record audience, and Michelle presented in November on green burial in the Vermont Forest Cemetery. Both of those programs were wonderfully received, and they asked if they could come back and talk to us about after death care. And the answer, of course, was a resounding yes. So I am going to turn it over to the three of you.
Hi. So Casey just got booted off because of the storm.
Okay,
She's texting me. I'm gonna share the slides, so if you can
you're good. You
make
should be
sure we're
able to,
good on
no
that
problem.
department. Yeah. And I don't know if you want to pin the two of us so we are at hanging at the top when we do the slides, but she's driving to a Wi-Fi spot. She'll be joining us shortly. So
Okay.
welcome, and we may limp through this because we were rotating, and so now our rotation's going to be off, but that's all right.
But we teach
Um,
this together all the time, so we'll be
we
we'll
do.
be okay.
We do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Michelle, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So very, very briefly, I call myself a death worker. I am a licensed funeral director. I am a trained death doula and a home funeral guide. My focus is on helping people lay their own dead out at home the way we used to before there were funeral directors for the purposes of natural burial. And I am also the founder of Vermont Forest Cemetery, which is the first and so far only cemetery in Vermont, which is solely dedicated to natural burial, which is the process of returning our dead, the people that we love, their bodies to the land that sustained them in life. So that's a very little small nutshell of what I do. I'm also a secret wayfinder. I do also work with people that are exploring using medical aid and dying before natural burial, but I don't list myself on the website, so you can't find me unless you know to find me.
I'll introduce Casey. Casey is an end-of-life doula that is in the Springfield, Brattleboro area. She's also a trained wayfinder. She's had trainings with Patient Choices Vermont and the Academy of Aid in Dying Medicine. And her business is called Doula Care for Dying. She offers a wide variety of support, whether you're advanced planning or you are working on wanting support for medical aid in dying, just general bedside doula support. She does it all. So, and I'm Lindsey Warren. I'm up in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, and I work through Journey with Compassion. I'm also an end of life doula and trained wayfinder. I also offer holistic supports like bedside music, sound therapy, Reiki. I'm a Reiki master, so some extra offerings that I do. And the three of us love to teach after death care, shrouding, natural burial workshops together. So here we go with a little condensed presentation.
So this is basically here because we want to remind people that we are all based in Vermont. So we are talking about death practices and rules and regulations that apply in Vermont only, and they will vary from state to state, and they are sometimes subject to change. So just while we are very confident in what we know and what we do, that we are not legal professionals, nor are we members of a certifying or regulatory body. Particularly if you are looking to support other people in doing this work, it is really, really important to make sure that you double check everything that you want to do or offer to other people.
All right. So in general, and maybe Michelle and I will split this slide because this was the Kasey slide. What is after death care? There's a wide variety of things that you can do to participate in after death care, and no one person has to do it all. After death care can include washing a person's body, dressing them, changing them into their final clothing, or getting them ready to be shrouded. After death care also includes cooling. It's important to bring the body temperature down, and so there are methods for rotating ice packets and different things. And after death care can include shrouding. Not everybody wants to be shrouded in a cloth. Some people choose they want to have a pine casket, or maybe they want to be laid in honor at home, but they're going to work with a funeral service to then be cremated. So there's lots and lots of options.
So this is a very traditional way of caring for our dead. 150 years ago, everybody was cared for in this way because funeral directors were not a thing in the United States. And so you can include any sort of religious ceremony, including being at a church and having a full mass, and that it does not need to take place in one place, that somebody can die in one place and have their care happen in another place and have their laying in honor happen in another place. So that this is something that is very much about the needs of the people that are going through this process. And it can also involve very things that we're very familiar with from more conventional burial practices, like a formal procession behind the body to a place of burial or to the place of preparation. And I see that Kasey was able to join us. So Kasey, did you want to chime in on anything about what is after death care, or do you want to catch up on your next slide?
I will catch up on my next one. Thank you so much for your patience, everybody.
Yeah, so an after death care also can include working on the transportation pieces, and you mentioned the procession. And yes, I had one other thought, but I'm sure it will come back to me. So, oh, I know. I wanted to say that this photograph is a picture of Michelle working with a group, training them for how to shroud a body. So, and here I am doing the same thing. So, why does this matter? Michelle mentioned that, we've been doing this for thousands and thousands of years, caring for our dead, and it's really the only last few generations where we've started to lose this traditional skill. So, it's a beautiful way to come together in community. Community grief practices also in the modern age, we tend to see less and less of that as people are dispersed from family units. So it's a beautiful way to connect with your neighbors, your loved ones, your friends, and work together. It's a great way to be hands-on. Part of the grieving process is grief is an emotion, and you think of emotion as it is motion. It's helpful to have things to do and to be in motion. It's a deeply human thing. We think of how we birth our children into the world, and that can be very communal and hands-on. And there's been a movement to be more involved in that, and it can be really healing too. It gives the brain time to process. You're literally needing time to connect neurons that this person is gone. And so having hands-on time with your loved one can allow your brain to adjust and to have a healthier grieving process. So we're returning to tradition, and it also opens up lots of different natural burial options. Um, and as I mentioned on the last slide, after death care is a lot of things, and you don't have to do it all. And you can also work with hospice to do some parts of it too. So another shout out to hospice. So I don't want people to come away from the presentation feeling like they have to do every single thing that we list, but it is a beautiful way to be involved and support the grief process.
I like to remind people too that while this can, a lot of people are very, very concerned about finances at end of life. The end of life process itself is very expensive, but also funeral care and hiring a funeral director can be really expensive. And so this is a way to slow the whole process down, to take control of the elements that are really meaningful, and also potentially a way to save money because when you're doing things yourself and in your community, that doesn't carry the same expenses as hiring a funeral director. So we'll talk a little bit about more hybrid options, but that there are reasons that are very practical for approaching this. And I was recently talking with somebody that also pointed out that for people that are maybe struggle with sensory input or, have very loud and boisterous families, the idea of being able to care for their dead in a space that is set up to accommodate either their sensory needs or their offbeat sense of humor might feel more comfortable than coming together to celebrate in a more formal setting like a funeral home or a church.
Yes. And I meet a lot of people who also feel like it's a trauma informed way that they want to go about the world too. So for people who are concerned about that, having someone take care of you at the end of life that you know and that you're familiar and comfortable with is, really gives people peace as well. So
So some people might wonder if you're using medical aid in dying, is in-home death care still an option? And the answer is yes. You can care for your loved ones in home, even if they have taken this medication, for all of the reasons you might normally choose to do in home after death care, right? It promotes further autonomy and choice. It's taking this care into your own hands. It returns care to the family. So there are certainly times where I have worked with folks who feel like a lot of the care itself for their loved ones has been done by other individuals, or that in deaths that they have experienced in the past, once someone has passed away or died, they're sort of whisked away by a funeral home, and then you don't see them again, sometimes at all, or sometimes until you do a viewing. But this returns care to the family, and so you can be as hands-on as you would like for as much of this process as you would like. And as Michelle and Lindsay talked about before, we can talk about hybrid options so that it does not have to be overwhelming. You can choose to do as much or as little of this as you want to. Natural burial is still an option. So for folks who are really interested in green practices and who have perhaps chosen um, a conservation cemetery like the one that Michelle runs, who does natural practices, yes, you can still be buried in one of those cemeteries after taking this medication. Um, one of the things that is important if you are planning to do your own in-home death care after someone has died when they're going to take the medical aid and dying medication is to start your planning process early. You're going to want to know that that is your choice for body disposition before you set the date to take the medication, because there are some additional elements to planning for that day that you're going to take the medication that you're going to want to do ahead of time. That day tends to be a very emotionally charged day, as anyone would expect it would be. And so having thought things through, made sure all of the supports, supplies, everything that you need is taken care of well in advance of the day someone takes the medication is really helpful. And there are some things that you can have on hand that makes this job a little bit easier, which we can talk about.
So back to the kind of legal landscape here. So there home death care, caring for your own dead is legal in every state in the United States. However, there are 9 states, including New York. So some of you are here tonight from New York and specifically that require having a funeral director present whenever somebody is working with somebody after death. And Connecticut limits whether or not families can transport their own dead. So just specifically having seen a couple people from those states in this chat, but just a reminder that we are talking about Vermont law. So in Vermont, caring for your own dead is explicitly legal in our legal system. Um, and you do not have to hire a funeral director for any point of home death care. And you can work with many other people, but you cannot pay anyone who is not a licensed funeral director for their assistance in this process. Um, so that is sort of understanding. You also have to go through all of the same, and we're going to talk about logistics next, but all of the same legal paperwork that a funeral director does for you, the family can do themselves, but you do have to go through that same process of getting the death certified and the paperwork. And I know that Lindsay's going to talk about that next. And for people that are interested in natural burial, so many cemeteries offer natural burial, but you can also, if you are caring for a body at home and your property meets certain requirements, also continue and bury the person at home on their own property, which is again something that has been done for it's a really rich tradition in Vermont burial at home, but there are again specific laws that need to be followed around how that cemetery is, where that cemetery is sited, how that cemetery is constructed, that need to be followed through. So as Kasey said, this is something where planning really is important because it just helps to know that you've made sure that everything that you need to take care of is taken care of, and that everybody that has things to do after the death occurs know what they need to do. Because I like to tell people, I have a 16-month-old son. Grief brain is a lot like toddler brain. It is difficult to focus. These are tasks, paperwork and logistics are not things that people want to do when they are grieving. Um, so you can appoint other people that maybe are less involved in the grieving process to do that. But making sure everybody is aware of the plan and what they need to do ahead of time can make it easier to kind of move through that grief fog and make sure that everything gets done.
So, what can you do ahead of time? I would like to introduce you to the term agent of disposition. That's a term we use here in Vermont, and your state may have a different term. So, when you do an advance directive, you are outlining who your healthcare agent is or your healthcare proxy. But you can also, depending on your state form, it may be listed in there. There's a place in the Vermont form for that, or you can add it as an addendum. If you would like somebody different than your healthcare agent or your executor of your will, your financial decision-making person, you can choose a different person for this role, or it can be the same person. But it's nice to talk to people ahead of time and think through who might be the person who is going to be making those decisions. And you might outline decisions and then something happens when you're traveling. And so that person, your agent of disposition, is going to have to help decide what is the best route forward with your wishes in mind. So other things that need to happen in this process is if you are having a death occurring in the home, then the death needs to be reported, and it technically needs to be reported within 24 hours. If you're working with a hospice, you're going to call the hospice and they're going to send a nurse to pronounce the death. But if not, emergency services comes, you can ask them for a silent approach, and they will need to assess the scene and decide if it was anticipated or not, and what needs to happen from that point. You will need to get a Vermont burial transit permit. And so this is something that there's a couple pathways forward. You could work with your town clerk. Some of them are familiar with a burial transit permit, working with the general public, and other ones have not done it, and you may be forging a new pathway ahead. And the other option is to work with a funeral director to get a burial transit permit. So this permit happens after the death has been reported and all the information, the preliminary report of death has gone into the electronic death record system that we have here in the state. And then having some transportation plans. If the person's not being buried at home, you have to have the burial transit permit to take them to where they are going to be going, final resting place. But even if you're burying at home, you still need the burial transit permit. We get that question a lot. Even if you're just taking the person right outside, through the front door. So still need that permit. Some coordination planning to have in place ahead of time too is to think about if you are working with a cemetery. Sometimes there are certain cemeteries in Vermont. It's good to check ahead of time if they have a green burial section. They may not do burials in the winter, and so being aware that you might need to have an option for sheltering your loved one with a funeral home that has storage. So that's definitely something to look into, or coordinating with there's flame cremation, and we also have water cremation available now in our state. And then home burial is an option too. And so working ahead of time to make sure that you have the proper site found away from water sources, away from power, a place that's private. It can't be right outside the kitchen window, and you have to own that piece of property outright. So there can't be a mortgage. You can't be renting. So all of these things are great to and very important to look into ahead of time.
I'm
Lindsay,
gonna
somebody just asked a clarifying question of the chat is what is water burial? And I think you were referring to water cremation.
Water cremation, yes. Did I say burial? Sorry.
And that is so flame cremation transforms the body to ash through using very high temperature, and this requires a lot of fossil fuel to do and releases a lot of greenhouse gases. So there's a process that is a little bit more, green, which is to reduce the body using a component similar to lye. It's called potash, sodium hydroxide, and pressure and a little bit of heat. And so the same thing where that dissolves all of the soft tissue in the body and the bones are then reduced to a powder that the family can treat the way that they would ashes after cremation. And the further benefit of that is that the ashes after cremation have a pH of about 11.4. So they're very bad for the environment, whereas the bones after water cremation are neutral. So just wanted to so we've talked a little bit about, doing this yourself and not feeling overwhelmed and the element of control, but sometimes it's really helpful to work with a funeral director. And sometimes it's necessary. There are a couple of cemeteries in Vermont that actually require a family to work with a funeral director for burial. And in New York, you would need to hire a funeral director for caring for the body. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're being hands-on with you, like in the process. I know a couple New York funeral directors that will just like come and sit in their car and and wait outside the house, and they're just there as a reference. But in New York, a funeral director is required to be a part of caring for the dead. But so you have to move a body. Not everybody has an appropriate vehicle. Not everybody has enough people in their family to physically carry the body from one place to another. So a funeral director has equipment and a vehicle designed to transport bodies. Most of us use minivans. So that can be a really helpful place. A lot of times people do not necessarily feel comfortable with the process of cooling the body and keeping it at home for a couple of days before burial. And so funeral homes, there are some in the state that have mortuary coolers that can take on that aspect. So the family can work together to prepare the body, and then the funeral director can come and take the body and keep the body at the funeral home until the time of burial or cremation. Lindsay mentioned that not all cemeteries in Vermont that offer natural burial offer burial in the winter. So this is a really tricky question where, some people think, oh, can I just freeze the body or can I cool it for several months until the cemetery opens again? Most cemeteries are closed November to May. And it is not particularly green to store a body for that long, nor is it natural to postpone grief for that period of time. And so it's when you're talking about storage, usually we're talking about sheltering a body for a period of days or maybe weeks until burial. If you need to postpone the burial for several months until the cemetery is open, it might be worth exploring different options, whether that's burial in another cemetery or cremation. And again, I talked about getting the paperwork. A funeral director is somebody that can do that. And oftentimes, although this is less of a factor after medical aid and dying, but body care can get a little bit more complicated if someone is an organ donor or a tissue donor or needs to have an autopsy after death or dies due to trauma, and a funeral director can help with that. Sometimes people don't have a place to prepare the body. If you're traveling from out of state to Vermont, chances are you're going to have a place where that can all occur. But if you live in Vermont, and you're utilizing medical aid in dying, where you live might not be appropriate. The room might be too small, or maybe it's up a very steep flight of stairs. And so a funeral home can also be an alternative place to prepare the body. And they can help you kind of figure out everything about how you're going to get from where the death occurs to the place of disposition. It can be difficult to find funeral directors that are supportive of this process. If this is something that you're exploring, I have many colleagues that I have worked with that are very open to working with families in this respect. There are some funeral directors that just will not. So again, to the planning piece, it is really worth having a conversation ahead of time with your local funeral director to see how they feel about supporting you. And it's okay to shop around and look for someone who is going to be supportive of you in these situations. And that's something that I know that Lindsey and Kasey as wayfinders are familiar with. So again, people coming from out of state can still have these resources, and it's something that also I can help with. So you can also reach out to other people. And you're not just limited to working with a funeral director. There are people that are trained as home funeral guides that can be a supportive presence. So if cooling feels overwhelming, they can be there to walk you through that process so that maybe it doesn't feel as alarming. And hospice nurses can also sometimes help with preparing the body. So you never have to do this entirely on your own unless that's exactly what you want to do.
Which perfectly leads into building your team, right? Um, in-home care or after death care very much is a community experience, whether that is a community of family, whether it is friends, a spiritual community. You might be receiving help from a doula, clergy, hospice. You also might be receiving support from some of this from your town clerk or deputy registrar for the paperwork side of things, and I will talk about that in a moment. But when we talk about who is involved in this, the hybrid option is not just about like, yes, some elements of this you could have done by a funeral director, but also as you are gathering your team, not every person who wants to participate in after death care needs to be a person who wants to do hands-on care. So there are many elements of this care that includes things like going to the town registrar, the town clerk, seeing if they are informed about burial transit permits, figuring out how to file that permit. Talking with your prescriber if you're taking medical aid in dying about the fact that you're planning to do at home death care, talking through how your death is going to be pronounced. So whether your prescriber is there on the day and they are signing the death certificate, whether your hospice nurse is the one who's going to be pronouncing your death officially. So that these elements all can go into filling out that paperwork and it goes as smoothly as possible. For families and loved ones who are navigating this for the first time, it can feel scary to ask someone how to fill out this paperwork, and you show up to your town clerk's office and you're saying, I need to get a burial transit permit. And someone looks at you with a blank stare because they don't know, because they've not done one before, that that's something an individual person can do, that it's done outside of a funeral home, and that it's their job to fill out that paperwork. So sometimes it can be really helpful to have someone who is a guide supporting you through this process. But also, it's really helpful to do this work in community. So Michelle, Lindsey, and I have actually taught several different communities of people individually or together as a group how to do in-home care. I volunteer for a non-medical hospice, and we have an after-death care team. So we teach individual families how to do this in-home care so that when the time comes, you have your team of people who are going to be participating. Folks have already identified what roles feel good to them, and they continue to have communication because you can change your mind. If on the day you thought you were going to be able to do hands-on care and that doesn't feel available to you, you can at that point call a funeral home and work with them to start doing this care as well. There are lots of options and ways to do this. There is no one particular correct way to do this. And I think that that's something that when we are training different individuals to do their own in-home care, we talk about all of the time, is the fact that there are a lot of right ways to do this work. It's very much a shared responsibility. At a minimum, when you're doing this care and you're going to be moving someone from their final resting place or from the place where they have passed to where they're going to be interred or buried, Realistically, you need to have at least 2 people. It's comfortably done with 4 or 5 people to do this work. Um, so you're sharing that responsibility. And that's just the physical aspects of this work. But there are many roles, things like you could be choosing to build your own coffin. And so someone can be doing that. You can be creating the ceremony that you are going to have. And there are people who can be responsible for important readings, for music that is going to be played. Lots of different elements of this process, not just hands-on washing, shrouding, and moving an individual.
So I wanted to pass along some resources to you all. Um, Pictured here is the Home Funeral Guidebook by the Home Funeral Alliance. They just have come out with a brand new edition. It's a pay what you can model. You can go to the website and get a downloadable PDF version, or they link you to, if you want a print version, to get one on Amazon. Michelle's one of the authors in this book. And Michelle, is the new edition larger print than the last one? Because it was very tiny.
Yeah, the new edition is
Okay.
larger print. It is no longer available on Amazon. So right now, the only print option is you have to download and print it yourself, but that will change sometime this summer.
Yeah.
But it is
Yeah.
larger print.
Yeah. Yeah. It's this new edition is hot off the press. So, um, Michelle, Kasey, and I are doing another after death care training course this October. Starts in October and goes into November. There are 2 online dates where we go over material on Zoom, and then we have an in-person practice day. And you can read more about that at journeywithcompassion.com and click the after death care up in the top. And then Michelle works with people, with families and individuals through her Green Mountain Funeral Alternative. So this is a separate business from the Vermont Forest Cemetery. And so she helps people plan what they would like to do for their green burial and can help get permits because she is a funeral director. So she's also, our go-to if we have a complicated case that has something unusual, Michelle is so gracious and allows Kasey and I to ask questions of, whoa, what would you do in this instance? So,
My goal is to
um,
train myself out of a job.
And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, when Kasey wasn't present, but Kasey is the head doula at Doula Care for Dying. And so her email is there, and my email is at the bottom. And we're always happy to chat with people, consult or meet with people and come do in-home trainings. Very, very happy to help educate. And I also wanted to mention all the pictures tonight. These have all been from workshops. You have not seen any actual dead people that have been shrouded. These are all workshop photos that we've pulled from various times. So we do a lot of, teaching even practical things about how to roll someone without hurting yourself and without dropping them on the floor. So anyway, I
Oh,
think,
that's from my workshop.
yeah, it's a January picture. This was in Northfield, Vermont. We had a great group. So, and I think everybody had fun. It can be a serious topic, but I think we really do balance it out with looking at the practical, looking at the ritualistic and spiritual side, emotional side, and we have a lot of good laughs too. So here we are at the Q&A.
One of the things that I'm going to go ahead and do is put my email address in the chat as well. We recognize that there's a lot of material to go through in a short period of time. And we had talked about this ahead of time. We like to be available to people to ask questions. So if you have a question that comes up after this session is over, that is okay. Go ahead and, feel free to reach out via email. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. But if folks want to ask questions, go ahead and take yourself off mute or put them in the chat. And I think we had one that we wanted to get back to in the chat as well.
That one is one I think maybe Amy should take.
Yeah, a question about whether you should notify authorities if someone is planning to use MAID. And so again, I will reiterate that you can avoid that whole scenario by having the patient enrolled in hospice. This is one of the key things that they do. The nurse and social worker from hospice may or may not attend the death, but even if they're not there at the time of the death, then they can be called to come and pronounce the death and support whatever part of the after death care that you would like support with, that they'll engage with. They can help, dress the body. There's all kinds of things that they can do. You can have all of the, disposition plans worked out through them if you choose, or some kind of a combination like everybody has talked about tonight. That being said, if someone is not interested in enrolling in hospice, if you're working with a support person like a doula, some death doulas may have relationships with the coroner in the area. And so that person may, be able to let the coroner know that this is an anticipated death. But again, each emergency response unit in that area that you are, they're going to have rules and regulations that they have to follow, that you can ask for. Like I think Lindsey mentioned, you can ask, please come to the house without sirens, silent approach. There's no emergency. This person has passed. But you won't be able to dictate what they do and don't do, right? They're going to have to follow the regulations and the law. So again, the easiest way to avoid all that is to engage with hospice.
And just to be clear for folks who are might be thinking like, well, I'm enrolled in hospice at home. When you're in Vermont, you would want to be connected to a hospice in Vermont that can send a nurse out on the day, and do that. And there are ways to do that. That's fine. You can initiate that with your hospice at home and do something called a travel contract, or you could get support on helping that get done. But I just want to be clear for folks who think to themselves, I'm at home in this particular state. I'm on hospice. When I go up to Vermont, we're all good. I'm just going to call my home hospice. They won't be able to help you from Pennsylvania up here in Vermont. And that's not the moment that you want to realize, oh, there was something that could have been done earlier in the process. So I just like to make that clear because I know I've confused people trying to explain that before.
Yeah, and I did want to clarify too that only a physician can sign the death certificate. So that is generally going to happen if, as part of the process that was laid out. But the family, the hospice nurse, the doula, none of those individuals can sign a death certificate. That is the physician. So that may be if you're using medical aid in dying, the prescribing physician, it may be the hospice physician, it may be, if you're not using any of those folks, your own attending physician.
And to that point, since COVID, almost no hospice will take responsibility for certifying the death. It almost always goes back to the personal physician. And so there's a 24-hour period that is given for the physician, whether it's the hospice physician or the person's personal physician, to sign the death certificate. And particularly if the hospice physician will not, that time window is often needed. So I recently worked with somebody that they had were planning on using their medical aid and dying in the morning and thought that they could just come to the cemetery and do the burial that afternoon. And you should always plan on having the body, needing to shelter that body for at least a day, in part because you don't know how long the dying process will take, but in part because it is probably going to take everybody involved at least 24 hours to get the paperwork. And if you are doing things on your own without a funeral director, your town clerk might not be open the next day to help you get the paperwork. And so, there's just making sure that you have built in, I said this is a way to slow the process down, but the process itself will also slow you down, because this is not something that takes place quickly, because you need to get everybody involved to do their part.
Thank you all so much for, as always, a very informative, excellent presentation. We're so grateful that you were able to join us again. Thank you so much. I'm just going to remove the spotlight, but I'll put it back on you if you want it. Okay, so for
Thanks
real,
for
I
having
can't find the
us.
button, Kasey. Sorry about that. Okay, just a couple of little housekeeping matters. I mentioned the helpline earlier, and so if you want additional information and you have additional questions afterwards, please feel free to reach out through our helpline, and I will also put my email in the chat. Amy's is already in there. There will be a recording of this video, and it will be available probably in a week or so on the videos page of our website. So please watch for that. Plus, everyone who registered will get a follow-up email, including all of you, of course, with with a link to the video. So please watch for that. As Amy said, you can also sign up for our email newsletter. I mentioned that earlier, but please make sure you do it because it's really good and there's lots of good information. And Patient Choices Vermont is, as I said, privately funded, very small paid staff, and mostly composed of volunteers. So if you enjoyed this presentation and would like to support our further work, there's also a link to that in the chat, and I will put my email there as well. And also, we'll be happy to stay if anybody has any additional questions based on the initial presentation about MAID or Act 39 or just anything that you didn't want to ask in front of the whole group. Happy to stay a few minutes and address that. So thank you all for coming. And again, thank you so much, Kasey, Lindsey, Michelle. You guys are great. You're wonderful presenters, and we're so grateful that you joined us tonight. Jody has a question. Where is Jody?
Hi. Oh, I know Kasey. I think she's wonderful. And thank you all for your energy and your wisdom and your compassion and so many things that you do for all of us. I wanted to say that I'm reading the something edge of sorrow, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, which to me has been an absolutely amazing book. And I'm wondering whether in your work you have felt that our culture has come to terms with some of the ways of holding space for rituals, for groups to coming together. I mean, you all are doing this wonderful work in our state, but I just wonder at large if you have a general sense that people are feeling more held and more cared for, and it's really has to do with our culture and the whole thing about, oh yeah, well you'll be back to work in a week, no problem. And and this is someone's husband or the mother who's died lives in a whole nother country. I just wonder, let's just love to know a sense um of your sense of that arena, which to me has been so disturbing.
Can you specify who you were directing the question to, Jody?
Oh, I don't think anyone, just in your work, because
Mhm.
I just I'm fascinated by the death doula. I was at Gifford Hospital for about 10 years as a volunteer chaplain. So I was at bedside, and have been at bedside even not on purpose when there was a death. And I remember asking Kasey a question when she came to the Bugby Center in White River that she answered with just the most, I mean, I will never forget your answer, Kasey, because it really riveted with me. It was really briefly, it was a situation where a woman had, all of her advance directives were in place. She had two sons and a husband. They were all in agreement. And a niece shows up who hadn't seen her aunt for 10 years and says, "Oh, this isn't what she wants. I know it isn't." And Kasey said, I would say, here is her advance directive. This is what she wishes for. I mean, basically, in a very kind way, said, basically go away. I mean, it was because this woman was there for 2 more weeks while they decided, or had to deal with this niece. So, anyway, well, I mean, anyone who wants to take the question, is that unfair to say? I don't know who to direct it to. So, just interested in any comments about our culture and how sad it is that the grief period, becomes so shortened or just not even, I mean, almost ignored.
I'll try to be brief, Jody, because I know other people probably have perspectives on this. But I would say right now, end-of-life doulas are having a moment again. Nicole Kidman recently got trained. We are hearing about that in the New York Times. We're hearing about it in Town and Country magazine. We're hearing about the director of Hamnet getting trained. And one of the things I think that sort of indicates is there is more awareness, and not everyone needs to get end-of-life doula trained and like be an end-of-life doula, right? But more death literacy in our communities means more people can identify these are the things that are in my skill set, that are in my wheelhouse, that I can offer to my friends, my family, my loved ones, my community, to really help everybody have a well-supported death. And so I think every time we're hearing about this a little bit more in a positive way, and people are getting curious and are getting access to information, that's a good thing. And I think we're seeing that again right now, which it gives me hope. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. That's great.
And
Ritual and being seen is what I'm aware of. And the whole isolation also. So sad.
I
Thank you.
need to I need to hop off, but I want to say really quickly too that this is something where because at the cemetery we ask that people as much as possible have family come in and support them. And it has been really rewarding to see that communal aspect return. I think that there's a lot of parallels when we think about earlier in the 70s when women were reclaiming birth as a non-medical process and it was okay to have birth in the home, right? That this is something where a lot of those same women are coming to the end of their lives and trying to reclaim death from the medical industry, right? But people are often uncomfortable with the body care piece, but they're willing to show up at the cemetery. And so it can be an inflection point where things can turn for people where, and Kate, I want you to answer this question because Kate Abrams is here in the chat. Her husband was the first person we buried at the cemetery, and one of the things that happened at that burial was her husband's body was in a shroud, and her 4-year-old grandson came down and said, can I touch him? And her youngest son, after watching his nephew come and touch the body, was able to come and be present with the body, right? And Kate can talk a lot more eloquently about that experience than I could in witnessing it, but it's a really wonderful way to bring people into an uncomfortable space, give them something useful that they can do. It's physical. You're carrying a body, you're using a shovel, but they are in the presence of the body and they're serving somebody's grief process. And I think that that can be another transformative moment for them. So, and with that, I need to sign off. But Kate, I look forward to your answer and hearing all about it when I rewatch this.
What was the
So,
question?
Thank you so much, Michelle.
good night.
Good night.
Yeah, my husband was the first person to be buried, and he actually passed away a few days before the cemetery was open, and so we had to have his body stored in a cooler at a funeral home for 8 days or something like that until they could actually get him into the ground. But it was a small ceremony with just just immediate family and my husband's brother and sisters. But the thing that really touched me was the way my 2 young grandsons, who were ages 4 and 8 at the time, they were just they were just so into it. They were fascinated. They were extremely well behaved. They worked just as hard as everybody else to fill the grave with the dirt. They had child-sized shovels, and the dirt was clay mud. It was awful, but everybody worked very hard to fill in the grave. And there is actually a documentary that shows my husband's burial. If I don't know how many of you have seen that documentary, but every once in a while I put it up on my computer and I watch it, and I just, my heart just beats with love for all those people that were there at the funeral, especially when my younger grandson asked if he could touch the shroud. His dad said, no, don't touch, but Michelle was right there and she said yes, and she knelt down with Finnegan and touched the shroud with him, and it was really cool. And his older brother, who was 8, Elliot, showed up at the grave. When we got to the grave, Ron's body was already above the grave, waiting for the ceremony to start. And Elliot picked up one of the chairs and put it right at the foot of the grave, like this far from the edge of the muddy precipice. I don't know, a dozen hands reached out to kind of pull him back a little bit before he fell into the hole. He just really wanted to be there and wanted both my grandsons wanted the whole experience. I was worried about what they would do at a funeral. I didn't need to worry about anything.
Thank you, Kate.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Kate, thank you
you
so much
all.
for sharing that. I think that is in the documentary that Michelle shares as
Yes.
part of her presentations. And When she spoke on Green Burial at the November Exit Matters, she did share that documentary. And so if you go to the page on our website that I linked with the videos, you can watch Michelle's November program that does include that.
Yeah. Yeah, Kate, thank you so much for sharing and for sharing your family story. Your husband and your grandsons and your whole family has educated so many people around this day, like ripples in the pool. What a beautiful, beautiful impact. So, thank you.